Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to take some complex source materials, sometimes pretty dense stuff, and really dig into it to pull out the most important, maybe surprising ideas for you.
Yeah, think of us as your guides through this intellectual territory. We're here to point out the really key landmarks and maybe some hidden paths in these texts.
And today, wow, we are diving into some really fundamental questions. Questions about reality itself, about consciousness, how we even know things.
We're drawing on the work of the great American philosopher William James, specifically from essays like Does Consciousness Exist? And A World of Pure Experience. These are excerpts, but they pack a punch.
They really do.
Yeah.
And James offers this perspective that honestly challenges a lot of assumptions we probably all carry around every day without thinking about them.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack some pretty mind-bending concepts, like his idea that consciousness isn't some special kind of stuff.
Right, but a function, that's a big one.
And his idea of pure experience as the basic material of everything, and maybe thoughts and the things they're about aren't made of totally different substances after all.
We'll also get to that classic puzzle. How can you and I know the same world if our experiences are private? And what about feelings, values? Where do they fit in?
And James even gets into why philosophers argue so much, suggesting it might come down to something deeper, almost personal, aesthetic even.
It's going to be a fascinating trip into the very fabric of experience.
So let's jump right in, maybe start with the claim that really grabs your attention first.
Yeah, that first big one. James flat out asserts consciousness does not exist. Which, I mean, on the surface sounds kind of absurd, right? My thoughts feel pretty real to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And James isn't denying that feeling, not at all. He doesn't mean thoughts aren't real or that subjective experience isn't real.
Okay, so what does he mean then?
His point is that we shouldn't think of consciousness as a separate thing, an aboriginal stuff or quality of being. Like there's physical stuff and then there's this other mental stuff that thoughts are made of. He rejects that second kind of stuff.
Got it. So it's not denying the feeling of being conscious, but denying there is some special mind substance involved.
Exactly that. He insists quite strongly that consciousness really just stands for a function, a role that certain bits of our experience play.
A function. That is a really different way to frame it. Can you bring in that paint analogy from the text? I found that super helpful.
Yeah, the paint analogy works really well here. So imagine paint in a pot at the hardware store.
Yeah.
Okay. In that context, surrounded by other pots, it's just saleable matter, physical stuff.
Right.
But take that exact same paint, the same bit of experience, let's say, and spread it on a canvas next to other colors. Now, suddenly, it's part of a picture. It's performing a different job, what James calls a spiritual function.
I see. So the paint itself, its basic nature, hasn't changed. But its context, its relations to other things, the canvas, the other colors, that's what changed its role.
Precisely. And James argues it's the same with experience. A single, undivided bit of pure experience, taken in one network of associations, plays the part of the knower, the state of mind, consciousness.
Okay.
But take that very same bit of experience, put it in a different network with different connections, and it plays the part of the thing known, the objective content.
So, an experience feels conscious, not because it's made of some special conscious material, but because of its relationships. Because it knows something or is known by another experience.
That's the absolute core of it, what we call the conscious quality, that feeling that our experiences aren't just there but are known. That comes entirely from the specific relations they have to other experiences. It's about the connections, not the stuff itself.
Okay, so that familiar split we feel, inner subjective world versus outer objective world, that's not about two different kinds of substance. Mind stuff versus world stuff.
Right. He's saying it's not about different substances. That dualism is real, he agrees. It's verifiable and concrete. But it's an affair of relations. It's about how an experience connects, not what it's made of. That distinction, he says, falls outside, not inside, the single experience considered.
Wow. Okay. That is a fundamental shift in thinking. So if experiences aren't made of consciousness stuff, what are they made of? This is where pure experience comes in, right?
Yes, exactly. Pure experience is his term for the fundamental material everything is composed of. He describes it as neutral and simple. It's the raw material, the materia prima.
So experience is made of experience stuff. It still feels a little circular when you put it like that.
Yeah.
What is this pure experience?
Think of it as the immediate moment, just as it is, before we've slapped any labels on it, before we've sorted into me or not me, thought or thing. It's what James calls a simple that, just raw actuality.
A simple that. Okay.
At the instant it happens, it just is. Only later, when other experiences look back, do we classify it and say, oh, that was a thought, or that was the table.
And this really pushes against the standard philosophical idea that thought and thing are, fundamentally different kinds of entities, heterogeneous.
Totally. James directly questions that assumption. Are they really so different? He points out they share a lot of categories. Both happen in time, right? Both can have parts, be simple or complex. We compare them, add them, subtract them, arrange them.
He has those great examples, too, showing how they blend together, like how the sensations coming from my eyes and the ideas already in my head just fuse completely when I see something, like those seamless circular panoramas he mentioned.
Exactly. You can't actually pinpoint in your lived experience where the raw sensation ends and the interpretive idea begins. It's all one flow.
Right.
And he also points to the words we use about thoughts. We call thoughts laborious, beautiful, confused, intense. Do those sound like descriptions of some thin, transparent, bare diaphaneity?
No, not really. They sound more substantial.
That's his point. It suggests thoughts have a richer nature, maybe closer to the nature of things than we usually assume.
So, to sum it up, the difference between my thought of the table and the actual table isn't the fundamental material, both our pure experience, but the context. The web of relations each one is plugged into.
That's it. A piece of pure experience in one set of relations functions as a thought, maybe connecting to other thoughts, memories, plans. That same piece, in another set of relations, interacting energetically with other physical things in space, functions as a physical object.
Okay. And this whole view is what he calls radical empiricism. How does that differ from, say, regular empiricism like David Hume's?
Well, first, the basic orientation. Rationalists tend to go from principles down to facts, wholes to parts. Empiricists like James start with the concrete facts, the experiences, and build up to principles, parts to wholes.
But he adds the word radical. What makes his version radical?
The radical part is his insistence that an empiricism, to be truly thorough, must accept everything that is directly experienced. And crucially, this is where he departs from someone like Hume. It must include the relations between experiences just as much as the experiences themselves, and these have to be experienced relations.
So he's pushing back against that view of the world as just disconnected dots of experience, Hume's distinct existences, like a mosaic with no grout.
Exactly. James says the grout, the connections, the conjunctive relations are real too because we feel them. We directly experience things being with each other, after each other, causing each other, similar to each other.
And he talks about different levels of connection, different degrees of intimacy.
Yes, ranging from just being loosely associated with, through space and time connections, similarity, causality, all the way to the most intimate connection of all, the co-conscious transition.
Okay, tell me more about that one, the co-conscious transition. That sounds key.
It really is. It's that immediate, undeniable feeling of flow within your own mind. How one thought melts into the next, one feeling gives way to another, within the same stream of consciousness. It's the direct feel of continuity. James argues this felt continuity is the original source of our very idea of continuity.
And he contrasts that smooth flow with the jump, the break, the discontinuity experience we feel when trying to access someone else's mind. My experience versus yours?
Precisely. That transition involves a felt gap. And he criticizes philosophers, his over-subtle intellects, who ignore this directly felt continuity and discontinuity. They replace it with abstract concepts, break things apart conceptually, and then create artificial problems, like needing infinite relations to link the bits they just separated.
So radical empiricism says, just take the felt connections and separations at face value. They're part of the data.
Exactly. Don't be lopsided. Accept the conjunctions you feel just as much as the disjunctions.
Okay, so this focus on experience and relations must really reshape how he thinks about knowledge itself. He seems to want to get rid of that idea of a huge gap, an epistemological chasm between the knower and the known.
Absolutely. He outlines two main ways we know things. The first is what he calls the common sense stage, basically, direct perception. Like right now you're looking at your desk, maybe touching the pen.
Okay.
In that moment, James says, the knower, your act of perceiving, and the known, the pen, are actually the very same piece of pure experience. They fuse. The experience is the reality at that instant. No need for your mind to perform some mysterious leap of self-transcendency to reach the pen.
So in direct perception, experience reality. Got it. But what about knowing something that's not right here? Like I'm thinking about Memorial Hall, but it's miles away. My thought has to somehow reach it, right?
Exactly. That's the second type of knowing. Here, one experience, your idea or memory of Memorial Hall, knows another potential experience, the percept of Memorial Hall you could have if you went there. This does involve what gets called self-transcendency.
Okay, so how does radical empiricism explain that? Is it still a mysterious leap?
No, not a leap. James makes it understandable through experienced intermediary experiences. Your idea of Memorial Hall knows the real Memorial Hall because it can initiate a process, a chain of other experiences, walking, seeing street signs, turning corners that eventually lead you to the actual percept of Memorial Hall.
Ah, so the connection is made through that potential or actual path of experience between the thought and the thing.
Precisely. The idea is true because it leads successfully through that chain to its terminus, the verifying percept. Objective reference isn't some magical connection. It's a feature of the fact that our immediate experience often points beyond itself. It's fringed by a more. It sets up expectations and guides us.
And this connects to his pragmatism, right?
Yeah.
The cash value of knowing.
Directly. The practical function, the cash value of your thought having objective reference, is this orientation it provides. It leads you towards the object's vicinity or towards experiences associated with it. Like, my concept of your anger is true if it guides me to correctly anticipate or encounter its consequences, hurtful words and deeds, as he puts it.
It's about navigating the flow of experience successfully. And that starting point, that instant field of the present, whether it's a direct perception or a thought.
That's the pure experience, the simple that. Just raw actuality, not yet judged as true or false, subjective or objective. Only later experience classifies it. Knowing isn't static, it's an active process, making itself valid within this ongoing, unfolding universe.
Which brings us right back to that tricky question. If experience is fundamentally personal, this simple that, how do we end up sharing a world? How do we both know the same Memorial Hall? Doesn't this view risk collapsing into solipsism, just my own mind is real?
Yeah, it's a classic problem, and James tackles it directly. He starts by just affirming common sense. Look, we do seem to share objects. We both pull on the same rope. We can both point to Memorial Hall and understand each other.
But some philosophers try to trip this up with logic, right? This source mentions an argument that if you need two descriptions for two relations, you knowing the hall, me knowing the hall, then there must be two halls.
And James basically says that's a word game. It's confusing the structure of language needing two phrases with the structure of the experience itself. The lived experience doesn't present the hall as doubled just because two people perceive it.
Okay, fair enough on the logic. But empirically, it's true, isn't it? Our actual percepts aren't identical. You see the hall from your angle, I see it from mine. Our sensory experiences are unique.
Absolutely right. He fully acknowledges that. Our minds don't terminate in a numerically identical percept. The sameness of the shared object isn't achieved at the level of the final individual percept.
So how is it achieved?
Through mediation and shared space. We point with a hand that I can see, guiding your attention through the physical space where the object, the molecules making up Memorial Hall, is located. The sharing happens via these intermediate public experiences in space.
And that numerically identical pen of pure experience he talks about, that initial neutral bit.
That can be the common element. Think of it like this. That initial neutral flash of penness is there. Then your subsequent stream of thought appropriates it and claims it as my percept of the pen. And my later thought stream can also appropriate that same initial flash and claim it as my percept.
Ah, so the initial pure experience is like a shared resource.
Exactly. It's passive. It doesn't change. It can be inherited or claimed by multiple mental histories, multiple minds. The minimus or yourness gets added later by the context of our individual thought streams looking back.
That's a really interesting way around it. Okay, another potential hurdle for this pure experience view. Feelings, emotions, values, pleasure, pain, love, fear, beauty, preciousness. These feel so intensely internal, so subjective. How can they be made of the same neutral stuff as, say, a rock?
This is a great question, and James has a fascinating answer. He argues these affectional experiences are actually ambiguous or hybrid. They aren't purely inner in the way we tend to assume.
Ambiguous? How so?
Well, for one thing, they are deeply tied to the physical body. Think about the James Lange theory of emotion. We feel sorry because we cry, afraid because we tremble. Emotions are perceptions of bodily states, and pain is often localized. My foot hurts, right? You point to a physical location.
That's true. And our language often treats them as objective qualities too, doesn't it? We say the diamond is precious, the man is hateful, the road is weary.
Exactly. Language often projects the feeling onto the object. James suggests this reflects a kind of primitive stage where anything felt in the presence of an object gets attributed to the object.
Like those examples he gives of feeling motion, like optical vertigo, or that amnesia case where initially the feeling of movement isn't clearly mine or the world's, it's just movement happening, a pure fact.
Precisely. That initial stage is undiscriminated. The classification comes later. And Jean suggests that for many feelings and values, practical life just doesn't force us to make a rigid inner-outer classification all the time. They can kind of float ambiguously.
He even points to how science and philosophy have reclassified things over time, like shifting secondary qualities, sound, heat, light, from being out there to being in the mind.
Right. Galileo and Descartes did that because it was useful for their scientific purposes. It served their intellectual ends better. It shows that inner and outer aren't fixed labels on reality, but classifications we make based on usefulness and how experiences behave.
How they behave. What's the difference in behavior?
Physical experiences generally act energetically on their spatial neighbors. Mental experiences are often considered spatially inert, but can affect other mental experiences.
And feelings. Are they inert?
No, and that's key. They cause definite bodily effects. Changes in breathing, heart rate, muscle tone, they have physical consequences. This, James argues, saves them from being purely subjective, absolutely non-objective.
And the body itself is the ultimate example of this ambiguity, right? Sometimes it's just part of the external world. Other times it's intimately me. Changes in my body feel like inner spiritual events.
Exactly. So the ambiguity of emotions and values doesn't refute the pure experience idea. It actually supports it by showing that subjective-objective is about classification and relations, not fundamentally different kinds of stuff.
Okay, let's talk about activity itself. We feel striving, effort, release. That sense of life, how does that fit in?
James sees activity, that felt sense of process and change, as another directly experienced reality and experienced conjunctive object. The raw qualia of effort, flow, resistance, yielding these feelings are our immediate experience of activity.
But then the philosophical debate starts. Is that felt activity the real activity? Or are the true causes, the real agents, somewhere else? Like, maybe it's really my neurons firing, or some abstract ideas, or even a larger consciousness working through me.
Right. The argument is, just because you feel active doesn't mean you, in that moment of feeling, are the ultimate source of the action.
So how does James approach this? Pragmatically, I assume.
You bet. Apply the pragmatic test. What concrete difference does it make if we locate the real agency in these other places?
Okay. What if it's a wider thinker, a higher consciousness?
Well, if I accept that my lecturing, say, is really transmitting its impulse, it might give my actions a sense of cosmic purpose, maybe alignment with a larger good. That's a practical, emotional difference.
What if ideas are the real agents, battling it out?
That might explain why a certain train of thought concluded the way it did, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee anything about my future feeling of effort or purpose in continuing the lecture. It feels less connected to my ongoing felt activity.
And if it's just nerve cells firing?
That seems very short range. One cell triggers the next. It's hard to see how that directly accounts for the feeling of sustained, purposeful activity over longer spans, like writing a chapter or giving a speech. The scales seem mismatched.
James also questions that deep metaphysical question. How does the pulling pull? How does causality actually work?
Yeah, he reframes that. He suggests asking that isn't seeking some hidden essence, but maybe just asking for the nature of action instead of for its fruits. Pragmatism pushes us back to the concrete. Where does the effect happen? What are the results?
And does he think the real cause, wherever it is fundamentally different in kind from the activity we feel?
He argues no. The actual nature of the working, the pulling, is likely the same kind of process, whether it's happening at the level of neurons or felt experience. We might be mistaken about where the primary locus of activity is in a given case, but the type of action isn't necessarily different.
So the key questions become more concrete, more empirical. Where exactly is the causal work being done in this situation? Which things are the primary agents? What are the downstream effects?
Exactly. It becomes a question of mapping the actual pathways of influence, rather than searching for a hidden essence of causality itself.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, the sources bring in humanism. What does James mean by that term here?
He presents it less as a fixed doctrine and more as a general shift in philosophical attitude, a slow shifting in the philosophic perspective. The core idea is to take things as they're experienced as, put the focus back on lived reality.
And how does this humanism connect back to knowledge and truth, building on the pure experience idea?
It reinforces that the same bit of pure experience, the same that, can be knowledge or the thing known, depending on context. When knowledge is indirect, knowing about something not present, that self-transcendency happens via those experienced intermediaries we talked about, the path connecting thought to potential percept.
So absolute reality isn't some unknowable thing in itself beyond all experience.
For the humanist, no. It's more like a limit or terminus within the possibilities of experience. Often it gets identified with the world as described by perception or science, the visceral level, the atomic level, whatever seems most fundamental within experience.
And truth itself is handled within experience, too.
Entirely. It's an intra-experiential affair. A belief or idea is true if it leads you satisfactorily to its intended terminus, usually, confirming perception or experience. It works in navigating experience.
What if a new experience clashes badly with an old belief?
Then the old belief gets tagged as false or needs modification. Truth grows and evolves as we manage to make new experiences and old beliefs congruous enough to mutually perceive and modify each other. It's about achieving a working coherence within the whole system of experience.
So truth isn't about matching some perfect blueprint outside of experience.
Correct. Those experiences that just are, the ones we agree on and aren't currently challenged, like basic sensory facts, they aren't true. They're just real. Truth is the relationship between our ideas and these experiential realities. Truth leans on reality.
Now, humanism often gets accused of being totally subjective. Truth is just whatever feels good to me right now. How does James respond?
He pushes back hard. He insists humanism does not deny reality beyond the individual's immediate perception. Humanists can absolutely believe in an external world. The point is that our beliefs about that world are always provisional, always subject to testing and revision by future experience, which might very well be experience of things currently outside the thinker.
But what about that satisfactoriness criterion for truth? That still sounds subjective.
James admits satisfactoriness is subjective and happens in the present. But he argues that's just being honest about our motives. When we talk about intellectual satisfaction, a key component is consistency.
Consistency with what? The absolute.
No, consistency within our own web of beliefs and experiences, making things fit together coherently. He acknowledges this might sometimes seem pathetically personal to an outsider, but it's a primary driver of our theoretical needs. And even consistency alone might not be enough sometimes, suggesting satisfactoriness is richer than just logic.
Okay, let's tackle a big philosophical opponent James engages with. The absolutists, like F.H. Bradley, who argued that relations themselves are logically incoherent. They thought reality must be a seamless whole, not distinct terms connected by relations.
Right, this is a fundamental challenge to James's radical empiricism, which, as we've said, takes experienced conjunctions totally seriously. James's world is concatenated parts linked together by various experience ties. This is opposed to the absolutist through-and-through union, where everything permeates everything else.
Bradley's specific argument was that external relations where relating to something doesn't change the thing itself internally are impossible. Things must be altered intrinsically by being related.
And James's response is quite down to earth. He basically asks, why? Why must a thing be changed to its core just because something is, say, on it or near it? He argues that for many relations, only the surface of the terms is involved. The paper is still paper, whether the pen is on it or not. Its inner nature isn't necessarily transformed.
He thought Bradley had a blind spot for conjunctions.
He says Bradley shows an extraordinary impotence in comprehending conjunctions, always focusing on separation. And intriguingly, James points out that Bradley's own description of how thought transitions happen non-spatially, non-temporally, actually sounds a lot like the felt merging or conflux we find within pure experience itself, like ice melting.
So Bradley denies experience transitions, but posits some abstract version that sounds similar.
Kind of, yeah. James finds Bradley's logical proofs against experienced relations unconvincing. He thinks the error lies in assuming that if a thing M is related to two other things, L and N, the thing M itself must somehow become internally complex or divided to handle both relations simultaneously. James says no, one thing can stand in multiple external relations.
This leads us to the final, really fascinating part of these essays. James's thoughts on the personal equation in philosophy. The idea that these deep disagreements aren't just about logic,
Exactly. He starts looking at the feelings underlying the arguments, particularly the absolutist discomfort with anything that seems brute, disconnected, or just bare fact, anything that resists being neatly woven into the through and through whole. He sees it as a fantastic dislike to letting anything say, hands off.
And he argues that calling something a fact or accident from an outside view doesn't mean it's inert or empty inside. A free choice might feel like a brute fact to an observer, but intensely alive and meaningful from the inside.
Right, so he starts to suspect the root difference is, well, aesthetic, temperamental, personal. He's very open about his own feelings. He finds the absolutist through and through universe suffocating.
Suffocating, that's such a strong personal word.
Isn't it? He says it feels infallible, closed, with no room for genuine novelty or possibility, no private bedrooms. He connects it to the old quarrel of sinner and Pharisee. It feels too neat, too buttoned up and white-chokered.
And the kind of freedom he wants is real freedom, not just freedom on a leash within a predetermined system.
A freedom that can genuinely fly away. So, for James, the core issue becomes absolutism's refusal to acknowledge this personal and aesthetic factor in how philosophies are built.
He even suggests these feelings might be prophetic, hinting at truth. And he seems frustrated that absolutists hide behind pure reason, refusing to admit their own preferences, forcing the empiricist to just wait skeptically for the whole picture.
Yeah, he openly confesses his own faith is partly aesthetic, driven by that feeling of dislike for the suffocating whole, not purely by logic. And he kind of wishes the absolutists would just admit their feelings about their system, which he suspects are there, but remain hidden.
It's a powerful way to end, suggesting that even in these high-level debates about reality, our deep-seated preferences, our temperaments, might be playing a huge role in what we find convincing.
It really makes you think about the foundations of belief, doesn't it?
Wow, okay. We really covered a huge amount of ground there. That was a deep dive into William James for sure. From consciousness as a function, not a thing, to reality being made of this neutral, pure experience.
Yeah, and how subjectivity and objectivity aren't about different stuffs, but different relationships, different contexts. How he built radical empiricism by taking all experienced relations seriously, especially that felt continuity within ourselves.
And how that leads to a view of knowledge not as some impossible leap, but as a concrete path through intermediary experiences. We look at how shared worlds are possible, the ambiguity of feelings and values.
The nature of felt activity versus real causes, and finally, that provocative idea about the personal aesthetic dimension of philosophical disagreements.
So, thinking about all this, what really resonates with you? Does hearing James's perspective, consciousness as function, reality as pure experience, sorted by relations, does it shift how you think about your own mind, your own perceptions, maybe even just the feeling of being you?
And here's a final thought to maybe chew on. If James is right, even partly, that our philosophical leanings are influenced by aesthetic tastes, if we prefer a concatenated world because the through and through one feels, say, suffocating, does that make those beliefs less valid? Or does it just reveal something deeper about what truth or reality means for us?
Definitely something to think about. Keep exploring, keep questioning. We'll see you on the next deep dive.